Awesome. Thank you, Cassie. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I see a lot of faces I know, which is awesome. Well, let me just give you a brief introduction about our topic, and then we'll dive in. As you all know, our student population is really diverse. There's all different kinds of wonderful individuals in our classrooms and on campus. We also know that young adults in this age range are still really forming their identity. They're trying to figure out who do they want to be, how do they want to contribute to this world, what is their place in society. So one of the things that we're responsible for, I feel, as faculty and staff on campus, is to model for them and with them how to have respectful discussions about tough topics. So this presentation focuses on ways that we can include all the diverse identities and support all the different students in our classrooms, while encouraging them to respect differences. Let's see, you want to share the slide? Are they shared?
It will not let me share the screen.
Oh.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Let me add you as a co-host.
Okay.
Sure.
There you go. That should allow you now.
Okay.
While Chase is pulling that up, please feel free to stop at any point. Just jump in if you have questions or comments, suggestions. That would be great. There we go. All right. There's our introduction. Okay, let's go to the overview. So today, these are some of the topics we want to make sure we cover. We're going to talk about identity development, some definitions that you need to know, how to identify subtle acts of exclusion, and some examples of common SAE, as we'll call them. And then addressing the SAE using a technique called Raven, and then some suggestions for building inclusive classroom environments. And then we'll end with some questions and comments.
So as Erin was talking about, young adults really are trying to explore their identity. Identity development during young adulthood focuses on many big life questions. They develop some core layers of their personal identity during their college years, and that can have a lifetime impact. So, they're really asking the question, who am I? And I think people really start to ask this question in adolescence, but it really does continue on through early adulthood. They're asking other big identity questions like, where do I fit into society? What are my values and beliefs? Are they separate from or the same as my family? And how will I contribute to the world? And they're also starting to think a little bit more critically about the complexity and honestly the intersections of their identity, and some kind of examples of the different layers of identity we have listed are like racial identity, cultural identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and religious or spiritual identity. Some important definitions to know as we go through this presentation. The first one is microaggression. Microaggression is an indirect verbal and or nonverbal insults directed at a marginalized group that are the result of implicit biases we all have. And another important word from that definition is implicit bias. An implicit bias is when a person is not consciously aware of the negative feelings or beliefs, biases they hold about a certain group. When I think about implicit bias, I think media plays a huge role in the way we form implicit bias. So that's kind of helps me when I'm thinking about that term. And then subtle acts of exclusion. It's basically another term for microaggressions, and it was originally coined by Jana and Barron in 2020. And then just the origin of the term microaggressions. The term was first coined in the 70s by Chester M. Pierce. Pierce was attempting to describe insults, African Americans specifically commonly here, and the term was kind of expanded to include other marginalized groups. So how do we identify subtle acts of exclusion? There are different types. The first is a microassault. This is intentionally acting in a discriminatory way towards a marginalized group. It's kind of the only type of SAE that is intentional. Usually like micro insult, micro invalidation, for example, they're unintentional. The intent isn't to cause any harm or offense. A micro assault might be like a racial slur or somebody making a racial joke, a racist joke or something like that. A micro insult is communication or actions that unintentionally convey rude or demeaning ideas about a marginalized group. So again, intent's really important here. I used to have a boss actually, and something she would say to me is that she was always surprised with how well spoken I was. That kind of implied to me that she expected me to be not well spoken for some reason, right? So that would be an example of a micro insult. Then a micro invalidation. This is denying or undermining the thoughts and feelings and or experiences of a person from a marginalized group. I usually bring up the example of color blindness. So like when somebody's talking about a racial issue, it's common you'll hear the phrase that, oh, I don't see race, I don't see color. And you know, the intent isn't to dismiss that person's feeling or experience, but that's kind of the result of that comment. And so then there's other forms of subtle acts of exclusion. So we've talked about some verbal examples. Those are like comments or questions. Then there's like behavioral forms. These are actions, gestures, or conduct. So an example would be like a person who's African American going into a store and being followed around because it's assumed that they're going to steal. That would be like a behavioral form of a microaggression. And then there's environmental. These are conditioned policies and circumstances. An example that comes off the top of my head is, a lot of school or work policies will sometimes be very restrictive of the kind of hairstyles African Americans can wear. So that would be an example of like an environmental form of a microaggression.
Excellent. Thank you, Chase. So we have some examples here of SAEs, and I wanted you to just take a second to read through these, and then I want to see if you all can help us spot where the subtle acts of exclusion are happening in these scenarios. So the first one is, this example is that an instructor is meeting a group of new students, maybe the beginning of the semester, and they're sharing a little bit about themselves and asking the students to do the same. And one student has a distinctly different accent than the local dialect, and they state they're from Pikeville, Kentucky. And another student speaks up and says, "But where are you really from?" So what do you think the SAE is in that situation? Just jump in and holler out. What's the implication here? And
I guess not believing that their accent is from their community they say they are from.
Yeah, not believing them. Yeah. And what were you saying?
I'm glad Camille spoke up, because I think it's hard to know how to respond. I mean, like, I know how I would feel. I would feel like separated from, like, kind of singled out, and I would be embarrassed. I would feel embarrassed and not ashamed, but just kind of put out away from the crowd, and because I like to belong, and so I don't want it to be like shine a light on me, like it would be embarrassing.
Yeah, it invalidates who they said they are. You're not believing them, right? That's kind of a tough one. And a lot of these are about how it makes the person feel, whether you mean for that to be the case or not. It's these little pokes at people that hurt without you realizing it. How about the second one? A student is talking to the office administrator who has a happy 50th birthday card on their desk. And the student says, "Hey, you look pretty good for your age." What do you think that's about? Or maybe how that makes the administrator feel?
I would say that's very ageist and rude. And I would, if I were the administrator in question, because I'm kind of close to that, so I feel this sort of deeply, I would say you're not going to make it to 50 if you continue to say things like that to people. Probably not the most helpful, but I think it would definitely get the point across. We don't talk about people's age and people's weight.
Right.
Nice.
Exactly. And as we get, that one, I'm like you, Molly, it feels a little close to home there. I'm thinking, come on. And why does it have to be about how you look, right? Anne?
Well, I agree with you. And this one, I hear this all the time, and I had to check myself. So, oh, have I said this? Did I just say this the other day? I mean, just like kind of stepping back thinking about, but I also want to compliment the person. But it's at the same time, it's like, you really shouldn't be. I don't know. It's kind of hard to know, and I guess you all will get to that. But it's kind of hard to know how to respond in a way. I want to be kind and encouraging and affectionate, but not demeaning. So I hopefully, you can talk. We'll talk more about how to handle it appropriately.
Yeah, I think that age one, because you are sometimes saying it as a compliment. You look great, but you're saying for your age.
You look great. Even if you said, look, you look great for your age, like I would be okay with that. But you look pretty good. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll take wonderful, sure. Pretty good.
Words are powerful, and just this little subtle change in terms can make the phrase or the statement feel really differently to people, can't it? Good. How about this last one? You've been assigned to work on a group project, and at the initial meeting, you notice you're the only woman or female in the group. And as the group begins to discuss roles and work tasks, a student looks over at you and says, well, you should be the note taker. What's that one about?
I can speak to this one from experience. And I think assumptions are made of who's organized. It could be several things, who's going to be responsible. So it is interesting.
Could be a compliment that you're organized and we know this about you. Yeah.
Erin, just from a different perspective, so I have had experience with this one, and I can tell you how it made me feel. So moving up the ladder, I've been here 24 years, and I started out in administrative roles, and I've worked my way up through different degrees and things like that, and teaching now, and the program manager here in the FCT&L. And I think it's been a hard divide in my history as an administrative professional into a more professional. Not that administrative professionals are not professional, but I think that oftentimes when people invite me to a committee or things like that, it's like, okay, well, they're the one that's going to take the notes instead of being a contributing member of that group. For the information and the knowledge that I have, it's more of like, okay, well, she's been a secretary before. So sometimes that's often offensive to people if they've been in different positions where they would be the note taker or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That just assumptions being made about that person based on what you know about them or how they appear. And
I've been a note taker so many times, and it's just tiring. I mean, it's so tiring, but I've gotten to where I kind of like being the note taker because I've been the note taker so many times. I've kind of had figured out how to make peace with it and figure out how to lead from behind, if you will. I mean, there's a lot of power in keeping organized and really seeing what's going on. I mean, there's, other people do tend to zone out. But I've also played the other role where I'm like, oh, I'm just going to check out and just take notes and not contribute, as a way of being passive aggressive as a response, not really on purpose, not to, but just like, oh, good, I'm just going to take notes. But you can use that as an opportunity to lead from behind.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I was thinking, as the only female in the group, that there's often an assumption that, oh, you're a woman and therefore you are organized and you're going to take care of things for us. And some of those subtle gender roles, those binary gender roles that are in the back of people's minds, whether they want them to be or not sometimes. Yeah, I like that, though, leading from behind, making a positive out of it. So, very good. Let's see. We've got a couple more examples here from some different angles where subtle acts of exclusion might occur. The first one is thinking, this statement kind of makes that person feel like you're invisible. This is a micro insult. So, and you may have seen this in some classrooms or meetings too. Say the third week of class, the instructor is calling out names of students to take attendance, and a student named Alishaya has politely explained how to pronounce their name every class, every time. And this time the instructor says, well, whatever, I'll just call you Allie, your name's just too weird, and then goes on. So making that person invisible, not making that effort to say your name and how you pronounce it is important, and I'm going to learn it. But unfortunately, this happens quite a bit. The next one is saying, kind of giving the person the feeling that they're abnormal, maybe limited intelligence based on their abilities. So, for example, Casey uses a wheelchair for mobility. On the first day of class, he requests a spot near the front of the room. Explaining it makes it easier for him to get in and out of the classroom. The following week, there's not a space for Casey in the front row. No one moves to help. And as Casey tries to maneuver a spot in the classroom, a student uses a baby voice and says, "You got this, little buddy." So that's kind of a micro assault, and assuming that because this person has mobility issues, they also have intelligence issues, or you can talk down to them. And then the third example is thinking about religious identity. And this one is kind of saying that their culture and religions aren't worthy. They're micro invalidating them. So the example is that Tori's Muslim and she's preparing to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, which is the end of a month of fasting during Ramadan. And the day of the celebration happens to fall on a day that her major course is taking their midterm exam. She's talked to the instructor about taking the test earlier or later so that Tori can attend these important religious events, but the professor replies, Tori has to stick with the schedule like everyone else, and then says, "It's not my fault you can't be Christian like the rest of us." So it's those little rude invalidations there that just kind of pop right out. Anne, what were you thinking?
I was thinking, what your examples of the things that people are saying, I mean, they sound extreme, and I have heard some things like this before, but also, even if the people are not saying these exact phrases, that is by implication. So, I mean, it may be what it's saying in nonverbal. I guess that's what your point is. I mean, because it just seems like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they'd say that. I have heard such things, but also it could just be what it's communicating. That's exactly what they're communicating nonverbally. I mean, which is, I guess, what I'm talking about.
Right, yeah, by even just saying, I can't change the test date, or you have to stick with the test date just like everybody else, you're invalidating them. You're saying your religion and what you're requesting of me is not important. Yeah, absolutely. Good deal. All right.
So addressing subtle acts of exclusion using the Raven technique. So the Raven technique was developed by Frank Harris and Luke Wood. They're from the San Diego State University. It's a framework to help us respond to microaggression that occur in public spaces, both online and in person. So it's a 5-step approach. The first step is to redirecting the conversation or the incident. The second step is to ask probing questions, The 3 is to clarify the values. 4 is emphasizing your own thoughts, and 5 is offering concrete next steps. So we're going to go through the Raven technique using an example of a subtle act of exclusion. So in this example, during a class discussion on gender roles, a student shares that they're transgender and explains their experience and ideas about gender roles in regards to being transgender. Another student in class decides to ask them, how far along are you in your transition? So the first thing I want to do is, what is wrong with this question? There's an assumption of a universal LGBTQ experience, right? They're assuming that there is like a transition process from start to finish that every transgender person follows. And then the other issue is it's a denial of bodily privacy. You know, what they're really asking is something that's very private about a person's body, and that can be very uncomfortable for a trans person. So how do we address this using the Raven framework? The first step would be to redirect. You can address the behavior by commenting on the question or by redirecting the class discussion and speaking with the student privately. But it's always good to assume good intentions and ask a student to clarify. You know, don't attribute to malice. Don't attribute malice. What could it be attributed to? You know, ignorance. I really like that phrase. The next step would be to ask. You may ask the student a question to help them think critically about their comment. You know, for example, asking them, do you think there was anything inappropriate about that question? Have them kind of reflect and really think about, what am I really asking? Values. Remind the student of the classroom rules and expectations. That might be what you do. You could say something like, I understand you're just curious, but your question made some pretty harmful assumptions and you're asking your classmates to share information that is deeply personal. The next step would be to emphasize, express empathy and explain the impact the comment or question had. Something like saying, it's hard to imagine what it would be like to have people asking you personal questions about your body all the time. And then next steps would be to direct the classes to resources that help them better understand what it means to be transgender. So, for example, you can direct them to maybe a YouTube video that is a bunch of transgender people just discussing what it means to be transgender, and all the kind of things that maybe they want to ask, but it's sometimes inappropriate.
Mhm.
So for the next slide, I have some examples of SAE from these focus groups I did with LGBTQ students here at EKU. I thought these were especially powerful because they're examples of microaggressions that have occurred here on our campus. So it kind of helps us to remember that these happen everywhere, and that it can happen anytime, right? So the first theme we have is discomfort or disapproval of the LGBTQ experience. Here's the quote from the student. I went to the Black Student Union one time just to be a part of that community on campus, and they looked at me funny because I had on overalls. So like we, queer people, can go into that space, but it doesn't mean that people who are also share that space aren't going to look at us like, what are we doing? This would be a micro insult. And this is like a behavioral form of it because they're not saying anything. It's more what they're doing and what their body language is communicating. You can tell when someone's talking about you, and you can tell by someone's body language whether they want you around or not. And, you know, I think especially marginalized people pick up on body language like that. And so that's just an example of how it's not always something that's said. It's something, sometimes it could just be something that like a behavior or just body language. The next thing is the assumption of sexual pathology and abnormality. The quote is, there are students like me who are Christian and LGBTQ. That's a hard stigma to carry, you know, because I mean, I actually got called out by a member of the church for being queer. This would be a micro assault. They were pretty much directly attacked and told, hey, you're gay, why are you here? And there was kind of this assumption that if being gay and being Christian is not compatible. And this student actually went on to indicate that they actually had to change churches because they no longer felt safe. And at their new church, they decided not to come out just so they can continue to attend services and not feel like it's going to be an issue. So then the next theme is the endorsement of heteronormative culture and behaviors. They don't realize how certain language or teaching practices are not inclusive to certain groups of students. When you say, you know, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, that leaves out a whole group of students. And I included this example because I think it shows how it can be something just so small and seem like something so unimportant, but it could really matter to somebody. You know, changing, saying something like, good morning, everyone, can make a huge difference. And it really does signal to people that you're considering everyone and that you're not thinking about people in this binary context. And so this would be an example of a micro invalidation because, you know, you're saying, you know, it implies that there's only ladies and gentlemen, right? That's kind of the implication here.
Stay on that for just a second, Chase, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And let's kind of go through them because this is part of why I got involved in looking at this topic is I hate conflict. I'm very conflict avoidant. I'm working on that because that's hard, but these are the kind of things that we need to address. We want to address, and they also happen to you sometimes. So, you know, there's both witnessing these types of exclusionary comments and also experiencing them. So what I'm trying to do is practice what would I say? Because if you've already kind of thought through it, it's a little easier to address it or help someone else address it. So let's look at that first one. This person has gone to the Black Student Union thinking that they can be a part of this group. Maybe they're Black and also they're queer. So what is something either the student could say in response, or if you were someone there and you heard this, that you felt like you could say in order to address it? And there's not really a right or wrong answer, just kind of a brainstorming what could be done here.
It's a little tricky because you don't want to call out whoever said it and make them feel bad. But, you know, you could add, I know, and anybody, and welcome to everyone who's here today. I guess something just general.
Yeah, making a more of a kind of a general open statement about, you know, we're all welcome here. Glad you came. Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah.
get into invalidating. I don't want to get into invalidating, but I would be curious as to know what process occurred that led that person to feel excluded, because you would think that, you know, the people in the community would want to know, but also the individual that felt that way might also want to examine what, you know, was it related to something else perhaps? I mean, I'm in that community and I can be a little bit extra sensitive to feeling excluded. And so it would help me sometimes, in that case, it would help me to process what it was. And it could be that I misinterpreted. And some of that is a consequence of internalized shame, you know, for my own, you know, my own sexual orientation. So it could be a good, you know, I'm not really sure. You know, that maybe that's not the right answer, but that would just be I want to process more about that.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of our own implicit biases almost, that, you know, sometimes I'm biased towards comments that people are making and I'm assuming that it means that they're against queer people or against Black people or whatever, when really that may not be the case. So perhaps this person could say, I feel like you're wondering why I'm here. You want to tell me more about that? But that's so brave, and that's hard to do, and it's not always the right time and place to do those things too. So you have to weigh the risks and benefits there. Yeah. How about the second one? I hear a lot of this kind of discussion from students and some of the focus groups and discussions that Chase and I have had with students, where they're really balancing their spiritual beliefs with also being queer and trying to find a comfortable place there.
I would think getting just people to talk about how they feel do they feel respected? You know, what do they want out of their religious experience or spiritual experiences?
Yeah.
It's interesting to bring it up and not be offensive on both counts is tricky.
It is. So many of these things are so tricky, which is part of why it feels really important to talk about it and start putting this out into the discussion, just in the world. Like, how do we handle these things, you know?
I would acknowledge, I'm sorry, Erin, for interrupting it.
No.
I would just acknowledge that there are certain beliefs of various religious traditions that basically do feel like that this is a sin, that this is an abomination, and that's that church's prerogative. That's, you know, and it, you know, maybe that's not the church for that person. I mean, you know, if that person may need a more affirming environment at this point, if they have. But I mean, some of it is mutual respect for people to have a different perspective and belief system than you. And, you know, and it is true that there are some churches, they view it as their, you know, their responsibility, their moral, ethical responsibility to call out what they would consider wrong behavior to save that person. And I don't agree with that. But I don't expose myself to that either. But I have had no choice, but also just reframing it and recognizing, well, that's their perspective and that's what they think they need to do. And then,
Yeah, yeah. And if you feel brave enough, asking that person that called you out to say, why do you feel like this affects you? How does this affect you by me being different than you? Or, so you may not want to open that discussion. It may not be worth it. Yeah, that's good. How about this last one? This one is a lot more common, and we have some resources at the end to help us rethink our language use to make even just these simple phrases, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, help us rephrase those in ways that are more inclusive. But do you have other examples that you can think of just right now where you might need to change the way you address a group of people, or even just in talking to students, language that we use that you might want to change around?
I know I'm going off a little bit, but I normally, when I start class, I ask preferred pronouns of what people want to be called. Well, someone didn't like that I asked that question, and someone called Frankfurt to complain about me doing that in my classes last fall. Fortunately, my dean and the provost supported my asking people's pronouns. But I've had a couple discussions with some colleagues, and I think I'm going to change it where I pass out cards and say, what do you want to be called? And so it's a little bit more, but less threatening. And that people just give me the card if they want, but it's still out there that I'm asking, because I think it's critical that I ask and people know that I am looking to address them in a different way that hopefully they find respectful. I would rather do that than just ignore it. So anyway, that's my example.
No, that's excellent. I think that's excellent. And I thought about that because I do the same thing, Camille. And sometimes I think by my asking this and having them go around the room and share their pronouns, is that somehow being putting them in a difficult situation, forcing someone to feel like they have to say what my pronouns are or not. And I've even had a student say, when you tell me what are your preferred pronouns, you're implying that these are not my pronouns. I don't own these. You need to say instead, what pronouns do you use? And that feels more validating to that person. These are my pronouns. They're not just preferred, they're mine.
So you're pointing out that we constantly have to be aware of this. And even when we think we're doing well, we're not going possibly as far as we need to.
Yes, it's hard. It is so hard. But we're all struggling together, and that's the beautiful thing is we can start talking about this and working through it. Yeah, that's great. All right, what about the next slide, Chase? Why is this important? There is actually some research, and you may have seen this in regards to stigma, internalized stigma, homophobia. We've done a lot more research on the well-being, the emotional and physical well-being, the impact that those things can have on people. And these subtle acts of exclusion have the same thing. We're finding that this continual stress from microaggressions, and even trying to decide, was that an intentional aggression or not? And, even hearing them for other people and being worried about trying to decide how to handle it can have physical effects and cause fatigue, decreases the immune functioning, increases blood pressure, emotionally can stir up anger, anxiety, depression. Cognitively, it diverts your attention. If you've said some things that have offended or invalidated someone, they can no longer sit there and listen to the class lesson. Sometimes you've sent them down the wrong road here, and they're so distracted by it. It can cause learning blocks, stereotype threat. They're feeling really uncomfortable in the situation, unsafe. And then behaviorally, we often see a lot of hypervigilance, skepticism, not trusting other people, and feeling like they have to comply with whatever is being called out there, instead of feeling like they have the power and the right to question or ask for people to change their language and the way they're handling a situation. I have a teenager, and they often come home and tell stories about the different teachers that they're working with. And one of them very quickly in the first class lesson, a history teacher started talking about their beliefs and the importance of having people like Trump and some of their really strict views were really important to our society, and particularly in helping control the homosexuals in the environment. And my child and their friends are queer, and they have had a really hard time the rest of this part of the semester even listening to what this professor has to say now, because that professor shared such a distinct view and immediately told the students, I don't like LGBTQ plus people. I don't think they're worthy. And it's been a real challenge for these kids to now continue to listen and learn in that classroom. And it was just that one little, couple little sentences, but it has completely diverted their attention. And they're really kind of on edge in there. So doesn't take much sometimes, unfortunately. So it's important that we really teach our students about these things and maybe help them learn how to handle it, because that's part of what we all need to do right now is what do we do about this, right? So here's some suggestions. Our next slide. There's a couple of ways that in our research that Chase and I have been doing, we found that we can try to start to address and model for our students and work with our students how to address some of these exclusionary acts in our classroom. So the first is to prioritize a culture of care. I feel like EKU really does push this in regards to mental health. They're really encouraging us to pay attention to the well-being of our students beyond just their cognitive learning, but also their emotional well-being. So making sure that we're sharing with our students information that's clear, and making sure that we're addressing things like implicit bias, talking about it with our students, bringing it up, right? But we find that when things are really tight and quick and students are stressed, dealing with often lack of sleep and stress, more of these exclusionary statements will kind of pop out. It's as if you've lost your filter, and you'll probably hear more of these things around midterms and finals and those types of times when students are extremely stressed. So helping ways that we can kind of address that is to engage in self-care ourselves, which sometimes we forget to do, take care of ourselves, but also then share resources and talk about how important that is with students, and how important it is to take care of themselves and to address their own well-being in order to be a better part of society, so to speak. And another one is to really consider flexible policies. So like the example with the religious identity issue, the student asks you for something, a change in something, an extension in something, really consider, is this something I can offer and do for the student? Does it help them in some way? Maybe even ask them, why is this important to you? Why are you asking me this? And having a little conversation about it, and then being open yourself as the one with the power to maybe making some changes for them if that's reasonable or possible. And then also being open to different viewpoints, right? Even viewpoints very different than yours. I'm very liberal minded, and I struggle sometimes to be very open-minded about very conservative views, and I need to work on that as well, listening to all sides, right? And respecting all viewpoints. And then actively listening, And I love this one. Just assume positive intent. Assume they didn't mean this to be mean, whatever they said or did. And that can be hard, but try to start from that point of assuming they weren't trying to do this and asking questions then and listening. Yeah.
Some more suggestions for creating inclusive classrooms to address subtle acts of exclusion. Establish shared expectation and values. Establish and explain the expectations for student behavior early on. So go ahead and address that. When you're talking about difficult topics, you're going to do this or that. Model for students that you value their ideas. And so just it starts with you. So if you're able to display the behavior you want to see in students, they're more likely to be able to model that behavior, and they'll also know what is expected of them, and review regularly or when needed. So, you can always refer back to these expectation and shared values whenever a SAE comes up in class. Then you can say, well, I just want to refer back to what we established at the beginning of class. Something I remember having in one of my classes that we did that was really beneficial is called Oops, Ouch. If we were talking about a difficult topic and somebody said something that bothered us or really got to us, we would say, Oops, ouch. And the person would say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. Can you explain how I offended you? And then we would talk about it, right? And I thought that was a really good method, and it worked effectively, at least in our class. So another ways and suggestions for creating inclusive classrooms is to raise socio and political and racial consciousness. So engage in your own development around implicit bias. So I think an important aspect of that is, acknowledging that you have it to begin with. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. So just being conscious of the fact that you have an implicit bias and that you have a lens that you're looking at the world in that kind of shapes how you understand it is kind of the first step in doing that. And you can support students in raising consciousness of bias, and that comes from providing resources, having these difficult discussions. Things like that can really help students, and also just support them in activities they want to do that also help raise social consciousness. I had a lot of professors and undergraduate that were very supportive whenever we did demonstrations or protests, and I really remember that, and I think that was really beneficial to my development and learning as a student. And finally, just prepare for difficult conversations. And you can do that by creating definitions. I find this really helpful, especially when talking about the LGBTQ community. Whenever I've done presentations in the past, I always usually make a point to make a definition list, because that really helps people to kind of understand. And it sometimes can be a little convoluted seeking out that information yourself, because the internet's great, but there's so much of it. So make sure you have good definitions, understanding your lens. So again, I like to use an intersectional perspective. I think that's a really good way to understand your lens. So understand that your identity is complex, and while you might have a lot of disadvantages, you probably also have a lot of privileges in some areas. It's not an all or nothing kind of thing. And then just managing your bias. So when you're called out, or even when you call yourself out, just make sure you are acknowledging your bias and you're doing something about it. You're apologizing, you're correcting your behaviors. That's a good way to manage your bias, and just build up your comfort level with difficult topics. A lot of times, especially if we're talking about race, gender, religion, any of those topics, it can be hard because we're not used to talking about it all the time. And it might not be something we have a lot of experience with. So talking to someone like a colleague that has a lot more knowledge or experience with the topic might be helpful. Or just, going out of your way to expose yourself to more content about race or gender is also a good way to kind of build up your comfort level.
That's good. Yeah. And just being humble and asking questions. Sometimes we're the ones with the power in the classroom, and to humble ourselves and say, you know what, I didn't realize that. Can you tell me more about this? Or I'm not understanding your viewpoint. Can you share more about that with me? It's kind of hard to do sometimes, but it can be really powerful. Yeah. So a couple just kind of wrap up tips here. We know that SAEs or microaggressions occur in and out of the classroom. We will see them in lots of places. And we do need to learn to recognize them and then address them when it's appropriate. Sometimes it's not appropriate, sometimes it's not worth a fight over, but sometimes it is. And so paying attention to those and addressing them when we can is helpful. And then working together, looking at this as kind of a team effort with the students and the faculty, learning to find and see our implicit biases and be self-aware and being willing to really listen to each other and our viewpoints. I swear I learned so much from my students, sometimes more than I think I share with them, because you know, these young people coming up and their views and their ideas, it's just amazing. So being open and listening can be really helpful. So classroom tips again, making sure that you have expectations and values that are really clear, assuming the positive intent, talking openly and honestly, and then finding ways to practice recognizing and addressing SAEs with students. Really important. So, on this last slide, we have some just different resources. There's so many different ones out there, but these are a couple of the favorite ones. I actually share this first one with students in my human behavior class. It's a kind of a funny, cute little video about how microaggressions are like mosquito bites. And you can get one bite and it itches a little, but if you're getting little bites all throughout the day or throughout the week, it starts to add up and it starts to build up and your bucket is full of all these microaggressions. And then sometimes people just snap. They're tired of it. They can't take it anymore. So kind of thinking of them not just as, oh, it's just a little something, you'll be fine. These things add up. So it's a fun way to look at that. The second one is a book. This is by Jana and Barron, the Subtle Acts of Exclusion book. Has really great examples of kind of talking through how do you address some of these things? What are some different phrases you can use? And where are there times when you probably shouldn't address it at this point? Particularly as an ally, if you see something happening to someone else, when is it appropriate or not for you to jump in and help them address that SAE? So I highly recommend that book. And then these other ones are just some more examples specific to ways you can address aggressions in the classroom, particularly, and ways that you can teach about it. That press book, it's a free online book, is really helpful too. It's got some great examples. And then this last one is really fun. They have a whole series of these videos where they're asking people, what are the most Googled questions about trans people, or Googled questions about Black people, or all sorts of people in wheelchairs, but they're really fun and educational and talking to people that are in those positions. Trying to say, here's kind of the things I wish people knew. I wish people wouldn't ask this. I wish they would ask this. So I put that one on there, but you can follow that thread and find some more too if you're interested. So, and those are all the things we have here. Any questions or comments or I don't know. You all have been a great group. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for this opportunity. It was fantastic. And I love this material. I'd love to be able to talk more about it. So I look forward to hearing more from you in terms of presentations about this, hopefully, and, Chase, I cannot wait to see where you go with the research. I think one of the challenges that we face, in addition to working with students, there's a power differential there. So, theoretically, I know we strive for it to be like, working together as a team, but in a traditional sense, there's a power differential there. We're allocating grades and these students are paying to learn. And so theoretically, it should be easy to set, to engage in that, for teachers to engage in that dialogue because of the power differential. You talk about conflict avoidance, whereas when we're talking to another colleague who keeps saying, hey, guys, or, that is another opportunity to overcome our personal anxiety about confrontation, to educate and just to open up that conversation, because I know I have on several occasions been with colleagues that are just with other colleagues that are that are the recipients of these microaggressions. And it's just another way of, I don't know where to go with it, but it's just a challenge. But so I'd love to hear more about what y'all think about that, just.
That's great. Yeah. And we just have to start practicing, right? I mean, start somewhere.
Well, my point is we have to hold each other accountable, as colleagues, on behalf of our students before they get to the classroom and they're saying things that would be interpreted as aggressive or microaggression. And that's hard, but that's part of our job. I mean, I don't like being firm with students and setting limits in terms of grading. And, I don't like, that's uncomfortable for me, but that's my job. I can't have feelings about it, so the dealing with the discomfort of microaggressions and where I need to be learning about, I need to be more sensitive with students. Also with my colleagues, I need to overcome that anxiety about confronting them and saying, look, that's not cool, or that's offensive to me, or I'm concerned about our other colleague in the group that may have interpreted that as a microaggression. So we have to get over our feelings about it and just put it out there to make any progress. We have to be those examples.
I think something that helps me kind of get over the anxiety over the confrontation part of it is telling myself how necessary the conversation is, but also like reminding myself that, I'd rather them have the conversation with me rather than somebody that is going to make them feel very bad about it. Some people, they get very offended, and rightfully so sometimes. And I think it's better to have, I think more change happens and more reflection happens when there's a critical conversation versus when somebody just gets really offended and says how they really feel. You know what I mean? And so I always try to remind myself that, I'd rather this person have this conversation with me because maybe somebody else isn't down the line. It's not going to be as patient and understanding. And that kind of helps me get over the fear of that confrontation. Yeah.
I love that. And also, I mean, if that's a gift that person's willing to share with us and be authentic with us about their feelings around it, I'd be more worried about what Camille was talking about earlier about taking notes and being kind of checking out, and being that, oh no, what that wasn't Camille, that was Cassie talking about being the note taker and how you kind of check out. You're marginalized and you accept that, but you never deal with it. You don't have that opportunity or the courage or the safe person to process it with. So I hope we can be those safe people.
I missed in the beginning. Can we get a copy of the slides?
Yes.
I was just going to say, Erin and Chase have shared their slides with me, and I can send all those to you. I know I'll be referring back to these when I teach, because I only teach in the fall. And I was like, okay, I need to look at these, daily and make sure that I'm on the up and up. So I've really appreciated the information, but I'll send those out to you, Camille. And I'm also going to see, I've reached out to our technology person to see if the slides can be incorporated into the YouTube, like the description, or if there's a way that we can do that. I don't know if we can or not. I'm not that tech savvy, but if so, then I'll link those into the document description.
Thank you. And I did want to say, Erin and Chase, I'm so glad you presented this, and Cassie for including it in FCT&L. I often think that I am on the cutting edge, but you have shown me today I am nowhere near where I need to be and want to be. And listening to Anne, I think that it's a respect issue that I want to show people I respect and role model that behavior. So calling them out is part of my providing respect, but I have a lot to learn too. So I hope people call me out, that there's a lot to learn. And I struggle in this community that there's a lot of people who don't feel we should be respectful and dignity. And I've been fighting with the DEI legislation lately that it's devastating. And how do we treat people with respect when many people don't feel that there is a need to? It's an uphill battle.
Camille, I saw something the other day, and this, when you said respect, some people see respect as a two-way street, like as equal, but other people see respect as I'm an authority and you're underneath me, so you need to respect me. So sometimes when they say, if you respect me, I'll respect you, they're talking about that power differential, right? That the respect. So I think sometimes it depends on their definition of respect. So, which is something I read the other day, and it was like an aha moment for me, right? I mean, I knew everybody had different definitions of respect, but then when I thought of it that way, you know, that is how some people are coming at it.
Yeah.
And
And I think
if I'm the authority and I want you to respect me, that means you should believe what at some level, that might mean you should believe what I believe.
Right.
So you're talking about the power, there's a power element involved, how you interpret power differential. And, you know, and what's to be expected in the classroom. You know, what kind of, is it traditional power differential where the teacher, everything they say is law? We don't approach things that way. And it's more egalitarian, you know, more of a collaborative. And you don't have a relationship where you're dictating and you're talking at and you're telling and labeling. You engage in these hard conversations. So thank you again for this incredible information.
You know, and that's funny because I have heard some professors say, but I'm a senior faculty member and I have a higher rank than you. And even amongst in faculty meetings, they expect that power differential. And it's like, wait, aren't we all faculty? Aren't we all staff? And so I think even like within our own, you know, academic world, some people still have this power differential based on rank or how long they've been at the university versus how long you've been at the university. And
You
I
know,
wish
that's
we-
not, power differential is not the same. Excuse me, power differential is not the same as expertise and time in. I mean, I do think time in, and which I don't want to get on to something else, but I mean, this is a huge topic, though.
that's a whole nother session, huh?
I was hoping we could share this knowledge broader. Like, there's only 9 of us here today. And 9 of us are interested and probably already addressed some of this in our classrooms. And we're here. So many people don't even know this is an issue that I wonder, Cassie, if there's any way that underlying we can keep educating, because the idea of microaggressions is critical for healthy communities.
To answer your question, Camille, yes. So these are the types of conversations that if people have the time to come to, that's great. But when they don't, they're missing out, not only because they're, you know, they're having to teach class or whatever. So what we're talking about in the FCT&L anyway, the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, is that we are developing, that's why we went to the YouTube channel. And we're also developing some asynchronous material so that when that faculty member is at home, when they have the time at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever the case may be, they can catch up on these at their convenience when they need the information right away, instead of waiting for a session at a certain time here in the FCT&L or online synchronously. So we're developing some content and some tools asynchronously, not by date, not by semester, it's by topic. And so we're hoping that this will be a resource to those that need it when they need it.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. Wow, you guys, I know, I feel like we could just keep talking, you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg and there's so much to learn. I really encourage you to grab that book if you like to read, just because it does have lots of examples and things that really inspired me to keep learning and thinking about it. So Janet and Barron's book. But gosh, you guys, thank you so much. What a great group. And we will keep talking about this. We're trying to do a little poster about some of this information for the Pedagogicon, try and get some of that out there too. So we'll just keep going, keep talking about it.
Yes, and I would be remiss if I did not say this. The deadline has been extended. We've gotten a lot of really great proposals already, but we have decided to extend that given the extent of the keynote speaker. We're going to have Stephen M.R. Covey at the Pedagogicon this year. So we really want a lot of great presentations, and that deadline has been extended to February 22nd instead of the 9th. So feel free to make those submissions or poster presentations for the conference. Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Chase. I appreciate you taking the time to share this information, invaluable information with us. And we hope that we can offer more sessions like this. Anytime you have recommendations for suggestions, please feel free to either submit your proposal to FCT&L, the programming submission form, or just shoot us an idea and we can reach out and make sure that we get some programming on the books for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you
Thanks
guys
for
all
your
for
time.
coming in.
You all have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.